Hello and welcome to the first video in a new series of watercolour demonstrations. Today I will be demonstrating for you this semi-abstract landscape with a beautiful little red fox. I'm beginning today with a plain piece of 100% cotton watercolour paper. I have it taped to my board and laid flat on plenty of newspaper. My colours are on screen. I will pop a list of my full equipment and everything that I use in the video description as usual, but for now I'm just using a large brush to get most of the paper nice and wet. We don't want to wet all of the paper for this. What I'm doing is basically wetting the top and bottom parts of the paper, leaving an irregular shaped band of dry paper in the middle. And for my new tool today to paint this semi-abstract landscape, I'm using a palette knife to apply the paint. Slightly unconventional for watercolour, but you'll see that it works a treat. It's a really interesting and fun technique. I read about it in a blog post on the Jackson's Art blog, which I will link below. It's a really interesting article, and it inspired me to have a go today in my own style, doing a watercolour landscape. So you can see I'm just popping my squidgy paint on the lower side of my palette knife. I've put on some raw sienna, some Payne's grey and some turquoise. And just like that, just dragging the edge of the palette knife across the top of where I've left that sort of little dry patch of paper. You can see on one side the paint is already beginning to spread beautifully, wet on wet, because of the lovely water we've got on that top part of the paper. But in other places the paint is staying put where it's dry, so you get these really interesting palette knife marks remaining. I'm just doing these horizontal sort of strokes here, putting the paint on really quite thickly, making some interesting sort of shapes with the palette knife, just encouraging the paint a little bit, layering it on thickly where I want it to run. In a minute I'm going to get out my water spray and encourage the paint to move around a little bit. And you can see how that turquoise is such a really bright and bold colour. It's already going. And just adding a little bit of extra colour here and there. It's actually a really fun way to paint. So this is why this is the first in a series. I plan to do a few more of these because they're incredibly enjoyable. I would heartily recommend having a go. This looks like something you might find fun. So you can see with my water bottle I've just sprayed along the top line there, and I've flipped the painting upside down. I'm propping it up with one hand and spraying with the other, and encouraging this movement of the paint to run down the page, or rather up the page, because this is upside down. So when you flip it upright, we're going to get these lovely whimsical sort of wispy long shapes, which is going to be the basis for some abstract trees that I'm going to paint on after this first layer is dry. And feel free to add more paint sort of as and when you need it. I will say that this technique uses a lot more paint up rather more quickly than conventional watercolour painting does. I did find that I had to go back in and reapply the paint because we're using it quite thickly, and of course with the spraying you're running the paint off essentially off the paper in order to create these marks, these effects. So don't be afraid to use a decent amount of paint on your palette knife and just spray away with your water spray until you're happy with the result, really. Basically what I was trying to get was along the top line these lovely sort of long misty shapes that could look like distant trees, and along this bottom line I'm just encouraging the paint downwards, basically to just run and form sort of reflections in a way. We're going to end up with this sort of almost misty lakeside feel. And you can see I'm trying to keep that middle section there quite clean, quite plain. It's going to be the snowfield which our little fox is trotting along. Just a little bit of extra encouragement. As I said, just keep on adding more paint. As long as you keep the paper wet, the paint will keep moving and keep running until you are happy with the results. And of course you don't have to use a palette knife for this. You could use anything with a hard edge to apply the paint in lines like this. I've seen some wonderful artists online have great success using an old debit card or credit card, store card, doing the old card swipe trick, which is also a wonderful thing. But I do like the sort of degree of control that the palette knife gives you. I think it's a really interesting way to apply watercolour, especially as I believe the palette knife is more sort of the preserve of oil painting normally, which is something I've never tried but would like to one day. So you can see how the extra paint I've added and the extra water means that along the top line we've got this lovely sort of misty shape springing upwards. The paper is beginning to dry along that top line as it's quite warm in here today. So I'm still getting those shapes remaining, and now all I want to do is just encourage the paint along the bottom. I haven't cut or edited any part of this video so you can see my whole sort of process of applying this. Obviously this is the technique that sort of goes where it wants, you know. It would be difficult to replicate this precisely, but I hope that by including showing the whole sort of process of laboriously sort of applying the paint bit by bit, applying and spraying and carrying on until you're happy, you get the general sort of gist of the idea. And can do something similar of your own if you're inspired to, or at least that it just makes an interesting and slightly different video. So I'm giving it another good spray along the bottom just to get that extra paint moving and to get those sort of wistful, almost reflective lines that I want. And of course you will get quite a lot of runoff and excess water using this technique, so keep some kitchen towel or some tissue handy, or some tea towels or spare cloths you don't mind getting covered in paint water. And as I said before, make sure you lay down enough newspaper to protect whatever surface you're working on. And just encouraging the paint to flow a little bit with the palette knife. Just want that water to move a little bit further down and get some really nice interesting lines coming down from that bottom sort of line of paint. So what I'm going to do now is prop it upright to dry. You can see here I'm just showing you, I'm just holding it at the moment, but this is the angle that I have it to dry at. And what I did was I've given it another good spray along that bottom line, and I've been standing it up to dry, and you can see I'm getting these lines here. This is after about 5 minutes of it standing upright, and I'm just letting the paint run. It's just a small photo of what my little drying setup is like. It's basically just propped upright. I gave it another really good spray along that bottom line, and this is what we've ended up with. So the bottom third has got these lovely sort of marks running down. I've got this sort of slight speckle of white in that top section there on the left. I hope you can see that. That was just from the water spray, a happy accident. That part had already dried, and then some spare droplets from my water spray had fallen onto the paper and caused these little white flecks, but I really don't mind. I think they look absolutely lovely. Couldn't have planned it better. So this is all dry now, and I'm able to just follow those lovely sort of long, narrow sort of marks that were made during the wash along the top, and just paint in some trees that echo the shapes that we've just created. I'm sticking to the same colours here as well, so I've mixed up a little turquoise with a little Payne's grey on my palette, just to echo the colours that we've already got here, and I'm using that and to paint in the trees, and I'm using my Pro Art fine sword liner brush, size small. Of course, use whichever brush you like. I recommend a liner brush or a rigger brush for this, because you want those lovely long slender strokes. But really this part of the painting is dependent upon the beautiful shapes you are able to create during the first stage. So when you tipped it upside down, your blooms of paint may come out a different shape to mine. They may come out longer or wider, or any variation really thereof. So that's just to follow the blooms of paint is all I was doing. If I'd had wide blooms, then perhaps I would have done wide trees with a little sponged on foliage, but I ended up with these lovely long sort of narrow shapes that reminded me of birch trees. So I'm following the lines and I'm just painting upwards, just doing these really long wistful trees that I think work quite nicely against this chilly frosted landscape. So I've just skipped ahead a wee bit, just so that you don't have to watch me carefully painting trees for the next hour. I'll show you the last couple, but all I'm doing is the same process. You can see how I'm holding my brush about midway up, just above the ferrule, so you get enough control to make sure that you're making your lines accurately, but still with the looseness to give. You can see I'm doing the lines this little wobble of the liner brush, which gives us this lovely natural looking branches. I find that sometimes with my trees I tend to over straighten the lines because I enjoy painting them so much with my liner brush, but then they can sometimes look a bit strange, a bit stylized and unnatural. So although these are quite stylized trees, I'm enjoying the having that sort of variation in the shape of the branches, and by holding the brush in the midsection I'm able to give it a little freedom to sort of wobble up the up the paper, following the grain of the lovely cold press paper, which of course gives us really nice texture in these washes to begin with. What I'm also doing is varying the thickness of the paint that I'm using to do my trees. So the one I just did, I used quite thin paint because I wanted it to look a little bit more distant and far away. And this one I'm doing here on the left, I'm using thicker paint. Again, you can see it's quite dark. Again, just mixing Payne's grey and turquoise. It's a really lovely sort of deep but rich blue colour, which I think doesn't stand out too brightly because of course blue trees are not quite not quite a thing, but somehow in this setting, in this wonderful sort of semi-abstract landscape we've created, I think it works. And you can see as well, this is going to be my last tree, by the way, so you can see that I haven't filled in every single sort of sweep of colour that I've got going up the top of the page there. I'm leaving some to the imagination. But of course, if you prefer, depending on what sort of colour blooms you end up with during your first sort of abstract stage, feel free to do the opposite, fill in all the blooms, only fill in half the blooms. It's really sort of it's really dependent this stage on what beautiful sort of shapes you end up with from that first wash. So now I'm happy with my trees, my lovely tall trees, and I'm using the liner brush again to put in a little bit of detail and just bring a little bit of realism, a little bit of texture to this bottom part of the painting. I'm just going along this lower line and adding a few sweeps of sort of grassy areas or reeds, or just a little bit of foreground interest basically popping up from this line, which I think is already really interesting due to the water spray, and you can see we've got all these lovely sort of marks drifting down from that quite thick line of paint. And so all I decided to do was put in a little bit of grass texture, and I'm just going to go along this line, and where the paint is where I'm going to put the grass. I'm going to leave some gaps where the water has run down and created these lovely sort of rivulets and shapes in the paint. And again, I've just popped ahead a little bit because I've just done exactly the same process. You can see just along that bottom line, just introducing some grasses and some little wispy shapes. Now I'm just doing the same along this middle line here. As you can see, I'm only applying it to where this line of paint is unbroken. Now I'm leaving those pale sections. And just trying not to be too sort of careful with it, just imitating the tree shapes we've got up the top there, just giving it a little bit of extra detail, pulling this landscape together. So now that that's dry, I'm going to begin with my fox. You can see I've just done a light pencil outline of just a simple fox silhouette going up that little slope in the middle there, using the white of the paper to make sure we get a lovely sort of clean red colour, so I'm not having to paint her over the sort of the blue-grey colours that we've got there that would of course sort of dull down that bright vibrant colour. I'm using burnt sienna here for the lovely bright orangey red coat of the fox. There are many other colours that you could use, but seeing as we've already got these lovely pops of raw sienna in our landscape, I thought it might be a good idea to sort of echo and harmonise with that colour and use the burnt sienna here as well. And all you need to do is just fill in your outline with a fine brush. I'm using the Pro Art Series 60 Master Strokes 4/0 size brush, so it's very fine, but basically you just need anything that's got a nice fine point that you can do some detail work with. And you can see it's a very simple silhouette because it's quite small, sort of contextually within the painting. You just need essentially that the body shape, the legs, and of course the sweet little face with those perky ears facing forward, and of course that big bushy tail. That's what you need for an outline that just screams fox. That's all we need. I'm also introducing a little bit of variation in the fox, filling in of course with the burnt sienna, lovely sort of rich vibrant orangey colour, but also I'm popping in, whilst the paint is wet, a little bit of Payne's grey as well, just along the back and around the hind leg, just to give some shadow and shape to the fox, just letting that paint sort of run in there, giving it a little bit of shading, almost without it looking like shading, if you know what I mean. Just that extra little bit of detail that makes it stand out. And this is best done wet and wet, so if you put a little bit of the blue-grey colour into your fox, it sort of, you know, the paint will bloom out and look natural, look like natural shading, rather than sort of hard lines. And I always just put a little bit of a black tip to the ears, a little black dot on the tip of the nose, and a little dot on the end of the tail as well. I've seen foxes with both white and dark sort of tassel tips on the end of their tails. We get a few near where we live. You see lots of variation in colour in our wild foxy friends. And seeing as this lovely fellow is painted on a white background, it would be hard to do the white tip on the tail, which is so classic, so I decided to just put a little bit of black on the end there, just to give a little bit of extra detail. And of course you can put as much or as little detail into this part as you like. It's very stylised, sort of semi-abstract painting, so a stylised semi-abstract fox is perfect. You know, you just want the shape, you don't need too much detail. I think I have a tendency towards over-detailing with these things, so let me know if you think my fox is too detailed for this semi-abstract landscape. And all I'm doing now is just popping in some extra sort of grassy shapes around the feet of our fox to try and just embed her a little bit more in the landscape. Just give her some grass to be running through. And now just for the final touch to this painting, just a handful of high-flying birds just scattered in that top right corner. And here we are with the finished painting. Thank you everybody very much for watching. I'm eager to hear what you all think of this one in the comment section. I know it's a slight departure from my usual style, but I found it really enjoyable, and I do plan this one to be the first in a little playlist of semi-abstract landscapes with beautiful animals just sort of popped in amongst the landscape. So I'd love to hear what you think. I hope you all enjoyed. Thank you everybody for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, or if you're new to my channel, please feel free to subscribe. I'd love to have you around. But that's all from me today. So until next time, thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you all again in the next video.